Your takeaway on the Lions, guys, pretty damn good.
Yeah.
They
Yeah,
look great.
I like it.
yeah.
But I'm more impressed with the ending and how polarizing that ending was for them, and the overtime, and deciding just to run and pound the ball, impose your will
That's
at the
them.
at the end of a game, and
That's them.
it's indicative of their coach.
Well, I mean, Beau, you watched that as a defensive lineman in OT. You know, it was like the minute they went to OT, you knew that like Goff might not throw another pass. And
I loved it. I loved it, Chris. I loved it. Ben Johnson, he's like, everyone's been gassing him in the offseason, and rightfully so. I feel like he came out with such a good plan. They did kind of like the end rounds of the outside runs and then just absolutely pounded the ball. And the Rams, like, they kind of have a young team, especially a young defense. Obviously, they're replacing Aaron Donald, but they looked like a little gassed. They looked a little, like surprised, shocked.
yeah,
You know what I mean? At the Lions came out juice. They were ready to go, dude.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things where when you have a young group in the run fits, there's some instinctive things that show up where you're like, you didn't play that block just right, and there was a crack of daylight because of it, and there were things that showed up late in the game, especially in the interior behind like Glasgow and Ragnow. I mean, most importantly, that's the guy whose name kept coming up when we went to these camps. They ran the ball right behind him. You mentioned they come out and like what's so impressive about the Lions is, and we're going to get to the Rams, they played their asses off in a really tough situation twice now on the road in Detroit. And Stafford, ironically, 0-2 in his old house. But it's like when you have a front like that's physical, they're well coached. Hank Fraley's turned into one of the best coaches in the National Football League at that position, guy I used to play with. They also have the play design from Ben Johnson. Like they have like a dynamic coordinator, and they also have a group that's like elephants on parade. And so you open up overtime, and you go with that reverse off like a counter action. They fucking they filmed. I'm all rattled. I'm like Jalen Hurts the other night. I just threw the ball to Nixon. Okay, now I got to avoid taking a shot in the red zone.
You're more like Bryce Young coming out of the gate and making an early mistake.
I know. I can't wait to get to that game.
As long as you don't end it like Levis.
Yeah, you don't want to end it like Levis. You want to be like Caleb Williams. You know what I'm saying? 1-0.
Yep.
But no, I mean like they just decided, hey, we're going to pound the rock, and having David Montgomery late in games, he must have broke 6 tackles on that run that put him in plus territory. And he gets hit on the 5, the second to last play, and he ends up at the 1-yard line, and you just know it's over. It was like that wave of bodies getting carried to the 1-yard line was indicative of the whole theme of the game, because ultimately when it came down to it in quarter 5, the Rams didn't have enough juice. They didn't. And if Jared Goff hits that ball to the back out of the backfield on that last drive, we're not even in overtime. Mm-hmm. So people that had the Lions -5, you were praying for overtime. And they got there and they imposed their will. That's Lions football. And the defense. Holy shit. We can't get through this thing without talking about the defense. Aiden Hutchinson was fantastic. You give him a couple fish out there, his hustle, the moves in his bag. You saw spin moves. You could see the guy, lined up inside, dominating. I thought Davenport immediately had returns on that investment, like you saw that. And then Anzalone right off the bat had that stadium jumping. The Carlton Davis edition, and just having Terry and Arnold, who probably wants some plays back. There's some flags, but overall, you could tell right away when they were up 2 scores early in this game. I turned to Nolan and was like, "Holy shit, this defense is different." Yeah. I actually felt gratified having picked them to go all the way, because I'm like, the defense is showing up. Jared Goff's up and down in that game, but everything you wanted answered for that group, I felt like it got answered, even with the people that were down. And the Rams, we talked about it, limped into week 1, down a guard, 3 tackles, a corner, eventually Puka. They battled. And Stafford, he's got to be the toughest QB in the NFL.
Yeah. Redonkulous, as Collinsworth.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And, he said throw of the year.
Yeah, week 1? Come on.
Little fucking 2.
Hold him up.
Yikes.
Little premature. It's just going to end up Beau's going to be closing every show. Okay.
Can't wait.
Little premature on it was a little premature on calling it the throw of the year. It was an incredible throw. I'm not taking anything away from Matt Stafford, especially because he was getting rolled up on. His ankle looked like it was hurting. I mean, this guy, if this is the offensive line you're going to trot out all year, and you're not going to see rush groups like that all year because this is a plus rush group. They didn't even have DJ Reader. Right. I mean, wait till he gets back. But, you talk about toughness. You talk about, like, circus throws. I don't even know if he was throwing the ball to the guy that caught it.
Right.
Like, I think he got torqued, as you would say, Beau, and the ball ended up hitting the other dude. He was trying to hit that crosser, and he got torqued around. And, I mean, he's just such a stud. And they got the quick game going. They had their moments. Cooper Kupp looks like Cooper Kupp again, and he might need to because Nakua could be out for a while.
Right.
And he was blocking his ass off all game.
I think starters and main characters on teams not playing in the preseason is kind of showing up more with all these injuries and guys getting dinged. And I noticed that a lot of the star players that didn't play in preseason, they were gassed.
Yeah.
And, like, you can kind of see that, and it's one of those things that teams have to work and find a way to get your guys into shape, into playing shape, because if not, you're going to see a lot of these guys getting dinked up because that's a lot of it. You get hurt when you're really tired and you're out there and maybe you're not making the right functional movements while your brain is fatigued and your body is fatigued. So there's something to look at, and we've seen a lot of guys limping off the field, a lot of stops in games across the board, and that's one of the differences when you don't have a couple of games, because this is a lot of these starters' preseason game, the first game.
No question. You, Beau, you remember how, like, when we were in preseason, and this shows up in timing for quarterbacks, like, look across the league. That's why when you see somebody, wait till we talk about Josh Allen or Kyler Murray in that game, like, the quarterback play was really high quality. I mean, for certain guys to come out and look as good as they did, for Caleb Williams, who's going to be, hopefully a stud in this league, I'm not going to pin that first week on him, like, reputationally. I'm not going to say that's who he is. But timing could have something to do with that. Timing showed up in the Atlanta game, but also timing's not all of it. And just being gassed, like that first drive of preseason, or God forbid you don't play in the preseason and you go play in Tampa the opening week of the season, and it's 95 degrees and guys are gassed. I'm sure guys were tired down in Miami for that Jacksonville game. This was one of those things that the attrition caught up, and also the timing for Matt Stafford, especially with those guys out. He threw two balls on both ends of the half that kind of bookended halftime and were totally uncharacteristic of him, depending on what you think his reputation is.
Yeah, I think you saw there, too, that this was a different secondary than the one Stafford saw in the playoffs last year.
Totally.
You could feel it early in the game and kind of over the course of the game. With Carlton Davis making plays, one of Beau's old teammates there, and then also the addition of Terry and Arnold. He might have had some plays he wants back, but it is a much improved group in the secondary. And I think, to your point, Chris, I think it makes you feel better about them down the line.
Their ceiling.
Going through the season, right.
The ceiling. The thing that kept their ceiling, high but not where it needed to be last year was that secondary.
Right.
And they addressed it, and just being game one to look like this, and there's a few teams that address secondary. The Eagles are one of them. We'll talk about them in a little bit. You saw immediate returns. The Packers, McKinney, like these guys, guys with instincts don't need a lot of preseason on the back end, and I feel like that showed up in certain spots. I also want to shout out Jameson Williams, and for Detroit having him, and we talked about probably at some point they take a stab at somebody before the trade deadline, outside at wide receiver in a perfect world, but Jameson Williams coming on makes things really exciting for them.
5 for 121 and a touchdown.
Yeah. And we got free football.
His post-game interview, did you see that? His energy was electric. Like, listening to him, like, after the game, it was just cool to see him, because it was so funny. Like, Goff was so poised, and then Jameson Williams was, like, so juiced up, like such an exciting young player. Yeah, just like a happy kid after the best performance of his career. I thought it was kind of endearing. I do have one thing, Chris, I want to point out about the Rams I thought was really cool. It's just like, okay, obviously Stafford's fighting an uphill battle, right?
Yeah.
Injuries at O-line. They shuffled dudes across the board at halftime. Puka was out, banged up. But the thing that was still really impressive to me, and also very interesting, is just how the Rams were able to still run their offense with such issues at O-line. Like, they were still relatively committed to the run game.
Yeah.
And still were involving Cooper Kupp on the end arounds, and Stafford was still cleaning up a lot of these problems at the O-line.
Yeah.
With just getting the ball out so fast. And that's one thing that I love about, that McVay offense is just, the ability for them to like kind of roll with the punches and still run all their shit with such a depleted offensive line was really impressive to me. And I also want to point out, like, this one thing that surprised me about this game is just how physical it was. I was a little surprised about that. Like, the Lions are a physical football team, and they looked good. I mean, you saw that in overtime, but like even the Rams, like even how banged up they were, like it was a physical game. And for an opener on Sunday night, like I kind of loved it.
I just want to say, and maybe what stuck in my brain from that playoff game was the physicality. And you think of them as like being explosive teams, and that's what's like kind of counterintuitive about this thing. But McVay's bread and butter has always come off of the run game. Now, last night they had to throw the ball a lot because of the way the game was dictated, but they're a physical group too. And that playoff game is one of the most physical games I can remember in the last calendar year. And these two teams didn't disappoint on Sunday Night Football. And we might see them play again. The Rams are out there in the West and we'll talk about some of these teams. We still haven't seen San Francisco play. We'll see them tonight. Seattle was sleepwalking, new coach in the first half, kind of started to pull away. Like, I do think the NFC West could prove to be the best division in football. And I think Cleveland's floor confirmed that for me this weekend.